Our story begins with the remnants of a tea ceremony, with mugs and old maps on the table, because this is the land of Asur. On one of them, we see quite clear drawings. Along with the gods and witches, the intersection of technology and magic was supposed to lead to the civilization's advancement. However, 1,000 years ago, peace on Earth was completely disrupted by the appearance of demons, who looked very intimidating and inspired fear in everyone's eyes. The flame of war between the demons and the witches spread quickly. It was not until 100 years later that a magic genius, with the help of the elemental gods, sealed the demons away with a talisman. He was very strong, and after 1,000 years, a wave of danger is quietly creeping up as the talisman weakened. Everything was in a purple gloom, which looked very frightening and inspired fear, because darkness is coming again. The elemental gods who once reigned in the chaos, they fought in the seas, in the forests, and even in the sky and on the earth. There were those who called themselves lords of fire, of wind, and there was also the god of thunder. All of them have already fallen. But quite unexpectedly, in the meantime, a new lord of the sea's successor appeared in the ocean. He was still very young, but serious enough. Everyone noted that the water god disappears without a trace among the waves. To investigate the talisman's irregular change, he has hidden my godly powers and took on the identity of a new student at Askar Academy. He was sitting at his desk and remembered how the teacher came up to him and asked, "Is the history of the magic he is teaching a lullaby?" He really didn't like the fact that the boy wasn't listening to anything and was asleep in class. So he ordered him to go stand outside in the hallways if he wanted to sleep more. But he was not the only one fighting. Rising to her feet and approaching her desk, the girl immediately fell to her knees, turning to the boy, asking what he was dreaming of. This small and beautiful girl's name was Exier. She is a spirit who is helping him on his mission as an imposter. She will face the upcoming dangers with him. It was his assistant who was also an excellent partner. For example, if she needed to listen to his conversations, she would do so without any questions or objections. Similarly, if you need lightning and swift thunder, it won't be a problem for her either. Any wish. Here's another example. On this moonless and windy night, let the flames of murder rise up to the sky. He stood and waved his arms as it all came to fruition behind his back. That's the kind of assistant you have to try to find. Suddenly, tears started coming out of her eyes, and she really started crying. Immediately, I remembered a situation in which a guy ran into a room, and there were 3 armed sea warriors with no legs standing next to him, guarding a guy and a girl in a school uniform. What should he do? He remembered when he held on to the tree and reached out to help his friend. But unfortunately, it did nothing, and he was unable to save her. And now he was alone and began to cry, holding a magic ball in his hands. He was very sad. The only thing he thought about was whether a girl named Ming could hear his voice. They needed to get off this planet sooner, so today would be their chance, since today is the releasing day. Meanwhile, night had fallen and the crow was sitting on a tree branch in the woods, watching the situation intently. Then she spread her wings and flew away. Today was also a full moon. She flew toward the great palace, where, amazingly, no light shone in any of the windows. The guy at this point pulled a book off the shelf and began to study it. He didn't need the light at all. He seemed to be looking for something, as he tossed aside one book after another without finding the information he needed. He was beginning to get nervous, because no book suited him. He couldn't find what he was looking for. So he climbed to the very top shelf, hoping that he could find the very book there. And by all appearances, he did succeed. It wasn't easy, but he calmed down when he could find her. It was enchanted and full of magic, because even if you rub it, you will see the result instantly. Throwing half the books on the floor, he continued reading, learning a high-ranking magic at that. He had to let himself try to break his talisman. As he crossed his fingers, he lifted them up, and immediately water began to form and spiral around them. It was the seal of the sea that appeared right before his eyes. Without distraction, he instantly started waving his arms in different directions, giving direction to the water and looking at his seal. Disperse. He became very wary when everything around him was already in the water, and the spells from the book began to activate and manifest as well. At this point there were purple lightning bolts and bright glints in the book itself that went beyond the book. The guy was also very blinded by it, so he pulled his head back and closed one eye. He couldn't understand what had happened. Had it failed? But it's not right. The talisman is starting to fade, which really alarmed the guy. He saw the exact same seal in darkness that was mentioned at the beginning, and he couldn't figure out what these symbols were. It made him very gloomy and scared, because why would it appear in this academy? Immediately, a hand appeared behind his back, reaching out from the darkness, where nothing was visible but it. It was a girl who said hello to the guy and put her hand on his shoulder, which frightened him like a little child and started screaming and crying panically, dropping the book from his hands. She fell to the ground and he asked the assistone Dawn just appear out of nowhere. But she came closer and added that it is because you were too slow. The guy was again standing by the shelves of books and a dialogue formed between them. Weren't you supposed to be enjoying the breeze outside? She was indignant and said, I haven't heard anything from you in so long. I am sick of waiting. The guy apologized, and she added that she could give him 10 more minutes to get ready, so let him try to finish faster. He wondered and looked at the floor, where the purple stripes from the book had also appeared. This surprised him, because was it really a book with a seal on it? How troublesome. He put his hand on his head and began to think about the whole situation. Immediately, a huge 15-meter-long snake appeared behind him, its eyes also glowing purple. And that really caught the guy off guard and surprised him. He took a piece of the purple remainder of the book in his hands and clenched it in his fist. It's surprisingly pretty sticky. At that moment, the snake appeared right in front of him, so there was no way to avoid it anymore. He definitely noticed it. Not believing his eyes, he decided once again to make sure. Is it really a snake? Without thinking long, he quickly put his hand on the ground and was ready to use his powers. He froze, waiting for the snake to make the first move. But she abruptly became calm and just stared at the guy, exceeding him tenfold in size. He wondered if it was lured here by that book. The girl saw the little warning that the seal was emitting and was also surprised. A few seconds later, the whole room was covered in purple tentacles that formed from that book. The girl could not understand what was going on. Was it black magic? She was more worried about her friend than about herself, so the first thing she did was look in the direction where he was. She was frightened, for someone is coming. The boy, meanwhile, continued to look at the snake, showing it confidence in itself and its strength, trying not to show fear. But the snake was smiling. She was amused by the fact that such a small man was standing in front of her. Especially near her also appeared a purple glare, which came from that very book. The boy looked at him and realized he wasn't going to die yet. He looked again at the snake and also noticed this book. Was black magic sealed within that book? Surrounding himself with water, he tried to figure out if this was an illusion type of magic. The serpent, meanwhile, began to rush at him and was ready to rush into attack, so he had to be stopped urgently. The guy activated his abilities and spread his arms, opening a new stream of water. And then, a second later, he surrounded himself with a shield that protected him from this monster effortlessly. The snake had not expected such a turn of events, and was perplexed, for it had never encountered anything like this before. Meanwhile, the Lord Sea said that this is not at all, and it can deal physical damage. Then he immediately jumped into the kite as if it were on a bridge, and there was also water. So, it must be summoning magic. And while the guy was jumping, a girl came up to him and informed him that a patroller was coming over here, so he needed to retreat very urgently, without wasting time. Suddenly, her eyes filled with fear. She could not understand when and how the black snake entered here. But there was no time to explain. The guy continued his leap into the snake to give it a crushing blow. Besides, he began to activate the spell, saying, "O spirit who dwells in the sea, please awake from your slumber in between the deep crevices." He really needed support, so he commands them with the name of the Lord of the Sea to appear before him, the demon of envy, Leviathan. He began to glow and emit a lot of light energy, which made the snake even more shocked and unexpected. Immediately thereafter, the white beam pierced through her, damaging her very badly. Suddenly, some footsteps appeared out of the smoke. It was the watchman who came into the building after hearing some strange and incomprehensible noises to see what was going on. He had a flashlight and stopped unexpectedly between corridors, for he also could not believe that the noises would be just in the library. So he decided to reconnoiter the situation by asking if anyone was there right now. The assistant was not expecting this, because that was all they needed right now. At that moment, the knocking on the door continued. The girl immediately warned Ming to hurry up, because the patroller is about to come in. He was surprisingly very calm, saying that he understood and accepted the information she gave. Next, he tried to concentrate by closing his eyes and activating his magic one more time. This time it was the style of the tides. He opened his eyes at a moment when a very large amount of water had already gathered around him. So he ordered the water god disappears without a trace and continued waving his arms. A second later, huge waves of water began to move and disappear. The janitor opened the door, and without opening, his eyes said that he was tired of saying that if you want to use the library at night, you have to inform us beforehand. Suddenly, the wind blew through his head, causing him to be very surprised, for the library was unrecognizable. It was like a real robbery and vandalism, something he certainly didn't expect to see on his shift. He was terrified and started screaming, trying to find out what had happened here, at a time when not all the water particles had managed to get out and tried to disappear. Meanwhile, print history brings us back to the moment with the tea mug and the old map, which reports that our land Ossur was once pure. Humans and spirits lived together, and all this was still along with the gods and witches. The intersection of technology and magic was supposed to lead to civilization's advancement. But however 1,000 years ago, a clan of demons suddenly launched an attack on the land. The serpent was just another head and superpower of the demon that was in the beginning. All this contributed to the beginning of the war between the demons and the witches. Many powerful witches and high-ranking spirits allied together to resist the demons. Despite managing to hold back the demon army's advances, the battle did not come to a standstill. Before us stood the 3 very monks who were the guardians of order and security. They were also involved in this 100-year war that had begun. Until the first magic academy of the land Oskar was established, which is also their current academy. It was the same building where the guy was looking for a book in the middle of the night. Here he is again, asleep at his desk while the principal is giving another lecture, which apparently is not very interesting. He talked about how the academy combined all the defenses of the land. After he noticed the sleeping boy, he paused a little and looked at him very intently, continuing his phrase, and finally sealed away the demons. Not seeing the boy's reaction, he used his spell and set a huge green snake on him. But he didn't care yet. He only opened one of his eyes and didn't understand what was going on, after which he was immediately bitten on the head. The teacher approached Hai Ming, who was trying to tear the snake off himself, and asked why he didn't say what the first big event the academy did after its establishment. Finally getting rid of the snake, he was able to lift his head and look at his teacher, for he did not understand at all what he was being asked. And so we're back to the very question that started this story. Is the history of magic I am teaching a lullaby? After that, he kicked the boy out of class if he needed more sleep. He rubbed his eyes and didn't understand. Do people who run around in the middle of the night to get things done even need a lullaby? Meanwhile, the demons too are sealed until that day, restoring the order of the land. It was 10 minutes to 10 on the academy clock, and the professor was thinking intensely about something too. That is his reason for showing up at Asker the demons that were sealed away with the talisman. Hai Ming also became very serious and prepared for the events to come. But from the outside, it didn't look as cool as it did in his head. Because the girls across from him laughed, asking, "Has he been punished?" But it didn't make the guy feel good, and he tried to explain to them that it was that giant black snake's fault last night. Seeing the guy standing there blushing in front of the girls, his assistant went up to him and said, "If it isn't our Lord of the Sea, you are being punished." How pitiful. She was also very pretty and smiling as she looked at him, for she dressed that way on purpose for all her meetings with him. He calmed down and said, "How dare she say that? If she weren't put into this situation by them, I would not even come to this academy." The girl came up and hugged him, saying not to mention there is a very powerful companion spirit, which is she, and she is following him. So, get your act together. And despite saying that, having to find the reason why the talisman has become weaker, they tried to understand this and came to the conclusion that together they had to face an unknown enemy, and the girl must protect Hai Ming well. It was her main goal for this period of life, which inspired her. The girl stepped back a little and realized that she had to try not to think about that anymore. But where did he go? But the guy just closed his eyes and thought about the situation. It never got out of his head that everything is always with the same pattern. Suddenly, the girl sneaked up on him again, unnoticed, and began to squeeze him tightly, ordering him not to ignore her anymore. But the guy just exhaled and tried to explain that the bell has already rung for recess. The girl became very wary and aggressive, because how dare he say that? Especially when he is only the acting lord, and he still carries the title of the Lord of the Sea. She stopped, clasped her hands together, and said that being able to ride the waves, calling upon the life of the seven seas, even the beasts of the abyss would listen to his calls. But the guy didn't want to listen to her. All his thoughts were just about the seal they saw. He wasn't interested in anything else. The girl put her hands behind her back and asked him if he really saw the symbols on the seal. But he was categorical and serious. "I can be wrong. I have seen that symbol before in a restricted book in Grandfather Hade's private collection." The assistant thought after these words, "It has sent the secret organizations of the land into chaos before." Their actions were suspicious, and there were marks of them all over the land. Hai Ming was also wary because everything related to it all vanished without a trace after the war. The girl was not thrilled with this information, and was really very surprised. Is he suspecting that the seal has something to do with the talisman becoming weaker? The Lord was also wary, for it seems that the key to the solution is very close indeed. He also added that Grandfather Hay's guess should be correct. While they stood by the window and talked, they noticed that this academy has already been infiltrated with an unknown power. All the while they were being watched by a snake that seemed to be watching them, and was ready to pass all this information on. Having finished their conversation, they went out together for a walk, where the girl for some reason was very happy and flew beside the guy, who was still walking and thinking about his own thing. Suddenly she became very embarrassed and began to transform, turning at once into a very cute and very beautiful kitten. After that, she began to lick her paws and stopped when she realized that she was much more comfortable in physical form. They were almost to the entrance of the building, but the girl was confused by the boy's appearance, so she decided to find out what was wrong with him. Was he still thinking about the seal? He stopped and became very wary of the fact that the seal had appeared in the Academy of the Library. It means that it has connections to the Academy itself. But as a newcomer in this Academy, the amount of useful information I can access here is way too little. The girl asked, "Now where should I make my move?" She also specified that his body smelled rather bad, so it would be good for him to wash. He also wondered if he stank. But the assistant added, "That's weird. It wasn't here yesterday." Immediately after, they were surrounded on both sides by some strange guys who started stopping them and asking them to make way, and don't block Miss Cindy's path." They were as surprised and shocked as they could be, so they looked at them and back with wonder. It turns out there was already a carriage, which was harnessed at once 2 horses. At that moment, the first step was taken, and a very pretty girl came out into the street, followed also by a guy dressed in a similar way. His assistant was very surprised, asking who they were and why there were so many people around them. "She is Cindy Sandal, Asker Academy's Student Council's vice president. She was really very nice and pretty, and you could see the confidence in her eyes." Taking another step, she looked up, for she was standing in front of the main entrance to the Academy building, which had been designed by true masters and fans of their craft. You could say it was a little Hogwarts. But suddenly her gaze changed abruptly. A shadow and anger appeared over her eyes. "It seems she is here to finish what she started." She turned to the guy and clenched her hand into a fist and said that she is back. He was perplexed by this, but she also went on to say that now, at last, she would be able to see her dearest big sister. Probably she must have gotten tired of waiting for her. She went on dreaming, her joy beyond measure. She added that Cindy will go and meet her now. Putting her hand over her heart, she was embarrassed again, which surprised her partner very much. He was disgusted. The vice president then cleared her throat and ordered the assistant to first report to the headmaster about the results of the examination of their branch schools this time. But she was still a little confused. Something was still bothering her, because she couldn't stop thinking about this strange old man who must have leaked insider information again. It almost caused this mission to fail, so she will have to punish him later. She became very angry, because if it weren't because of her precious big sister, she would have skinned and fed him to beasts already. How suddenly she was very surprised because she could not understand where was such a bad smell coming from. She looked toward the crowd and realized it was coming from someone in the crowd, so she asked to step to whoever was stinking now. Everyone started to disperse, and the guy's assistant asked him, "Shouldn't you try to get close to her, and why don't you try to fake a personality?" But the guy stopped her, because all the movements of the academy participants were always in the public eye. "Didn't Grandfather High say that we should lay low as best we can?" After that, he became alert and looked up, because since they did violate the boundary treaty in a way, each and every spirit or god were forced to sign the treaty, which forbade them from leaving their historical sites. The vice president at that moment asked everyone to disperse and looked warily towards the guys, at the moment when the Lord of Sea continued his story, mentioning that he is a human who became a god is an accidental loophole in the system. After these words, behind him stood the same girl who was very unhappy with the smell and asked him to turn around and stand in front of her. Ming was also surprised and asked if she was really sure that she was referring to him. Without answering a word, she immediately went as close as possible to him and began to examine and sniff him. She was very surprised and disturbed by the smell that departed from him, because this could not be any mistake, so he stank for sure. The VP immediately pointed her finger at him and asked if he was a newcomer in this school. The guy was completely uncomfortable with this, so he didn't even know how to react because he had just been laughed at in front of the whole academy. He just agreed and blushed a lot. After that, the girl immediately turned away from him and asked him to follow her to the meeting room, from which he was also no less surprised. But she waved her hand and said that he had no right to refuse. Immediately, now we begin to see a chess game in the midst of gloomy lighting, which is immediately watched by a huge snake, exactly the same that eavesdropped on the dialogue, and attacked the guy. She crawled and watched near the chair of her boss, who was dressed in a black cape and watched the game of his wards. Everything was very gloomy and in dark colors, after which the snake crawled even closer to him, almost to the level of his head, after which it began to climb in, from which the chess player was very surprised, but did not particularly show any emotions, since he was also hiding behind a mask. A conversation began between them. Now that I think about it, that little Missy from the Sandal family found the newcomer who snuck into the library. What should we do now? As you understand, they already knew everything about the guy for a long time, and the smell from him was just a simple cover. Another monster with a Joker mask on his head immediately entered the conversation and gave his answer. The Sandal family has been giving us a lot of trouble. If we count in this newcomer with an unknown background, I am afraid our actions might be limited. After that, he also made his move on the chessboard, and suddenly someone also added that there is absolutely no reason to worry. It seems that this was the most important of them, because the chess players fell silent and stared intently in his direction, waiting for his further comments. He also continued that the smell has already been imprinted, after which he also took the chess in his hand and made his move, adding that now they just have to wait for them to fight against each other. It was really very creepy. A smile immediately appeared on his face, which inspired fear and misunderstanding. You must agree. Meanwhile, the girl led the boy into one of the meeting rooms, opened the curtain, and said that this newcomer had arrived. She also emphasized the fact that his body had the scent of a seal on it. Now it was clear why the smell was coming from him so strongly at the time. But the guy was very surprised because the atmosphere here felt very strange. He also hoped that Xier was doing fine outside. Immediately after the guy was introduced, they started discussing him, asking could he be one of their participants? But one of them also replied that he could only confirm the fact that the guy had touched the seal. That's why he's only thinking about this situation right now. Could there be any chance that he could be their secret agent? Immediately, I was reminded of the fact that 3 days ago, outside the academy, it was very dark, and there was an owl flying around that noticed something very suspicious indeed. Then, in the middle of the deep night, something started to explode. This was immediately followed by some footsteps accompanied by a smile on the face of some monster who was very impressed to go to such lengths to chase after him. It turned out that he was not alone at all, but with his partner, and they were standing at the very top of the academy in the middle of a full moon, discussing a very important situation. One of them added that no wonder you are from the head of the 7 great ducal families, the Sandal family's young Miss Cindy Sandal. After all, she was the one standing in the middle of the explosion in the middle of the night, and around her there was a very bright yellow glow that looked like an electrical discharge. The masked men continued their dialogue. This small mischief of our doing. It is not something so great that it had to concern the young miss of the Sandal family. Her gaze immediately became as cold-blooded and full of determination and anger as possible, and she said that he blabbers too much. Then immediately she created a huge yellow hole near the scene of the explosions, with gold chains that went toward the 2 masked, unidentified men who were discussing her. She was furious and wanted to destroy them. But they were also not as simple as they might seem at first glance, which is why they also used their abilities to also protect themselves from the magical chains that the girl threw away. She began to laugh, for the chain practically surrounded the protection of the masked unknowns, who also hovered in the air above them. They also had a lot of fun because things were really starting to get more and more interesting, as the monsters looked down to see what was happening now. It turns out that the girl's boyfriend came to the rescue, who heroically tried to drag these monsters to himself, or to squeeze them with a chain, depending on his luck. They could not have expected such a turn of events at all, so they began to discuss the situation, adding that Miss Cindy had shown them her nature, so they began to worry that their plans had been spoiled. There was no point in them being here anymore, so they apologized and said we would be taking our leave first. The guy at this point was still trying to pull them to the ground, and the girl started screaming that Victor wouldn't dare do that. The guy then made another sharp swing with his hand, which allowed the chains to further constrict the defenses and bring the monsters closer to him. But they didn't seem to care, because they kept laughing and started to say goodbye to them, after which another huge explosion appeared in the sky, which dispersed the whole big cloud and broke the magical chains. And then, within seconds, there was not even a trace in the sky of the events that had just taken place, except for the smoke that had formed from the explosion even earlier. The guy immediately apologized to the girl, but she said it was okay, though she was as angry and agitated as possible, saying that they should at least not let them get away with it. After which she offered to just go to the academy together. And so, she reached out her hand to open the curtains and look in the mirror. She couldn't help thinking that she has only been gone a month, but the seal has already blended itself into the student body. She turned to him and asked if Haiming Oceanus was really standing in front of him. Then I asked him to tell me what's the objective. Hiding himself in Asgard Academy? The guy was very excited and frightened by this, because he had no idea how they were able to discover his identity. So he urgently needed to come up with something. He rolled his hand behind his head and said he was here to learn magic, of course, because only those with magic can have a bright future, you see. You could tell something strange by his behavior. So the girl clenched her hand into a fist and put her mug of tea on the table, then said she should have known better that you wouldn't admit everything that easily. It was clear from her that she didn't trust the guy, so she turned to Victor to fix the situation. He immediately waved his hand and said he understood, which also really scared the guy and made him think. Suddenly, Victor snapped his fingers and began to smile mysteriously. Everything around became black and white. The glare of lightning appeared, as well as that very seal at the bottom, which really shocked the guy. He became very serious and angry. Does this appear to be a high-ranking enchantment? After which the entire room has been locked down. Yellow ribbons also appeared, which were also magical with lightning discharges, operated by the same girl. She used them to create 3 yellow guards of order at once, who started screaming that now the guy was going to end and die, because they immediately started pulling out their weapons and attacking him at a time when he was just watching the situation going on and trying to figure out what he should do. At that moment there was also thunder and lightning outside, which very much caught the green-voiced girl's attention. She looked out the window and saw huge black clouds, after which she immediately thought of Cindy. It was the president to whom the assistant had reported that some things had happened. She was very startled that Miss Cindy is bullying a newcomer again. The president was also a little surprised and thought about it. Then she looked up at the sky and at the situation going on, saying that she understood everything. At that moment, the guard swung his axe and then struck the ground with all his might, breaking the concrete floor. And the guy just watched what was going on and tried to figure out what to do. At this point, the second guard also came up from behind and swung at the guy, which he was ready for. That's why at the moment of impact he jumped up and did a somersault, dodging the blow and landing on his hand. He also swung and kicked back, which struck the guard's head, causing him to fall and throw the weapon from his hands. After that, a huge cloud of smoke formed, just like the one at the academy that night, among which you could hear the order to the warriors not to go overboard. A second later, another guard flew from the smoke at the guy, who already wanted to destroy him with his sword, and brought him as close as possible to the guy's face. But he was also concentrated and activated his water power, which completely paralyzed the hand of the guard and protected the guy from the blow, surrounding him on all sides with water. He tried to speak respectfully to the vice president, who looked at him, asking what she was trying to do. But she was very surprised, so he can dodge it. Looks like he has some talent. He was very surprised that she ignored him, so he turned to her again, saying, "If you are going to continue doing this, I will have to call for the professors to deal with this problem." He also reflected on the fact that it was really very good that he told Exier to wait for him outside. At that moment, Victor swung around to punch the guy in the back of the head, which he also felt and became wary. So he instantly reacted and ran away, which also surprised his abuser by breaking through the smoke barrier. Cindy analyzed the situation and could not understand how he managed to summon a magic barrier in a moment. She also didn't understand how he was able to block himself from fatal damage. But during the escape, the guy hurt his arm very badly, and also injured himself additionally, so he stopped to catch his breath. His hand was completely damaged. He looked at it and realized, even surrounded by the water barrier, it still dealt this much damage. After him, he decided to cry out in pain for a while, when suddenly he was surrounded again by that smoke barrier with lightning, immediately after which the guards and the very team from which he had already seemingly escaped reappeared. So without thinking long, he immediately decided to ask them, "What should I do?" Well, our story today begins amidst a huge stone wall, near which the main members of the academy surrounded a guy who was holding onto his arm in pain, and was visibly injured because he did not engage them in a duel. The girl looked at him again and said she was now giving him one last chance. They wanted to know his motive for coming to Asker Academy, so they started mocking him. But Hai Ming was serious and realized that this room had been locked down by an enchantment, and his chances of escape were slim. He also realized that if he began to fight them unexpectedly, it might arouse quite a lot of suspicion among his enemies. But he also thought that if he didn't, there might not be a future where he could fight back. The girl realized that the guy was not just silent and turned to Victor, who immediately began to respond and move everything around, including the law enforcement officers. He stood in front of the guy, who was still holding on to his arm in pain, showing that he wasn't a threat. Then he took out his chains and wrapped them around his arm, and at the end of them were also sharp spikes, which he threw sharply in the direction of the boy. The guards also began waving their weapons on the ground in preparation for the attack. And now, after a few seconds, they were all practically at arm's length, in front of the Lord of Sea, who was still playing the role of a defenseless apprentice. He kept thinking about what he should do. Even though time was short, he had to make a decision here and now, lest he be destroyed. So he immediately ordered First Seal to appear, which instantly jumped out with great speed, and a second later, the guy already had a sword as well, with which he masterfully destroyed the guard who wanted to destroy him. He also looked to the side to check the situation, but the Guardian was definitely no longer a threat, as the Seal of Envy had worked on him, blowing the enemy off the face of the earth. The girl was very surprised by this because she did not expect any resistance at all. At this moment, Hai Ming was already behind the back of the other guy who wanted to destroy him, and apparently did not expect any repulse because he was very scared. He looked in his direction and was surprised, but immediately a water sword blow flew in his direction, which he managed to catch very quickly on reaction with his chains. So a very real fight broke out between them. Victor began to worry because it was really very close, and Hai Ming's hand was tied to the chain, which severely constrained his movements and prevented him from working. So with a sharp movement of his second hand, he made his blow, which flew straight into the head of his offender, which he obviously could not have expected and was shocked. It flew back a few dozen meters and broke the ground with itself. But the guy was unstoppable. He immediately turned to Leviathan to activate the second seal as well. The girl already panicked and quickly ran up to her boyfriend to ask if he was okay, but he could not say anything because he was in a lot of pain. This made her very angry, and she looked toward the new member of the academy, who had already gotten a taste of the battle and was ready to continue, weapon in hand. She noticed that he actually hid his true strength, and it seems there really is something off about him. So she instantly waved her magic stick and ordered the guardians of the Thunder God to deal with it and destroy it. When they heard their orders, they immediately rushed into battle, but Hai Ming easily outpaced them, rushing in with swords to meet them. And so, having made a step, he attacked first the first guard from the back, which he did not expect, for which he was destroyed. But at that moment, his partner was also in the back of the guy, so he rushed to retaliate and make a sword blow. It was very close to his head, but he reacted in time. The style of the tides, water pierce, was immediately activated. It was he who immediately surrounded the guard completely and created a protective field for the guy, adding to his strength. The girl didn't want to fall behind either, so she summoned the destructive thunder of the universe. Everything around her went black. She waved her wand and said that, in accordance with the ancient contract made upon numerous peaks, listen to my call and strike forth here. She was very angry and frightened at the same time. Immediately after that, lightning and swift thunder activated, after which everything went black and only white glare was visible in some places, which made the guy a little worried. He looked that way and just thought of a plan for how he would need to react in battle. And so it begins. The girl herself shouting to the guy that she is ready to fight and launching white lightning bolts in his direction. Suddenly, green trees appeared, which also suddenly began an attack. Behind them immediately appeared a girl with green hair, who immediately ordered them both to stop, and a second later, all those trees completely surrounded and rewound the guy, protecting him from lightning strikes. He also stopped to see who she was and why she had come here, so he began again to pretend to be a defenseless student. To the side was some obscure portal made of twigs from which Student Council President Julia Warrister, who was quite a nice and calm girl, began to emerge. Cindy panicked and was shocked, because she hadn't expected to see her at all. She wondered why would her dearest older sister suddenly come here. She realized that she could not drag her older sister into this problem, realizing that she had to handle and solve it all on her own. So she ran up to her and asked, "Did you come here for something?" But the president was very serious. She asked if the girl really started bullying a newcomer again. She was immediately embarrassed and tried to cover it up by denying her guilt. Trying to justify herself, she said she only wanted to test out this year's newcomer's ability. But she looked at her with suspicion and approached the guy, saying, "We are sorry. Please forgive my vice president's insolence." The guy was very happy and shocked at the same time, so he didn't even know what to say. But the good news was that he didn't have to use and prove his power. The girl at this point kept looking at the guy with suspicion, which he also instantly noticed. He sensed that the girl was trying to tell him something with her mind, mostly threats of reprisal if the boy said anything extra. So the girl said that her dearest older sister better not hear anything extra from him. She stood there with her eyes closed, hoping the guy would say what she really needed to say. And so he got embarrassed and tried to start his speech by saying that the first thing to do was to prioritize leaving. Could he leave right now? The president, of course, agreed and told him to follow her, pointing to the exit. Then she turned to the girl and said that they would go out first, and she would come out after them. And so Hai Ming successfully managed to escape and leave the room, hiding and barely using his powers in battle. Victor immediately approached Cindy asking, "Are you really letting him go scot-free?" But she started smiling and asked, "When did she say that?" A very cryptic plan for revenge appeared in her mind, so she asked, "Why should I let him go?" And when there were no more threats, the girl offered to write a report to the old man first, then talk about the matter of this newcomer. She looked out the window and tried to switch gears a little and get away from the situation. Meanwhile, it was a very bright, clear day at the academy. But her thoughts wouldn't leave her. For example, now that she was thinking about it, wasn't their dearest older sister really cool just now? Well, the cat had already tried to sneak in through the window to observe the situation as well, so it immediately ran up to its master, who was walking along with the president of the academy. She was very surprised that he was hurt, and tried to find out what had happened, but the guy didn't want to answer, saying it was nothing. Kat also turned her attention to the girl with green hair, asking who she was. But Hai Ming said it would be really problematic to explain, so he offered to talk after they got out of here. He really hoped that his identity was not exposed. At that moment, a girl with glasses, holding a book in her hand, burst into the hallway and started shouting, "Miss Worcester! It is great that you are here." Then she got as close to her as she could and told her that her help was badly needed in the teacher's lounge. But the guy couldn't stop thinking about the president's last name. Was she really a Worcester? He immediately remembered the old sage who had addressed him, saying if you one day met up with the little Missy from the Worcester family, give this to her. It was some very valuable green talisman that was handed to the guy. He looked at it, and at the time could not yet understand that it could really help him one day. But his thoughts were immediately dispelled when the president of the academy addressed him. She apologized again for what had just happened, and said she would order Cindy not to do it again. Well, now she will be leaving now because she has something she needs to do. But the guy stopped her immediately, even though he was very worried. He pulled out this green pendant and started waving it around. The girl immediately noticed it and was very surprised. The girl was very surprised when she took this pendant in her hands, for it belonged to her family. Immediately afterwards, she became very thoughtful, and she wondered why it was in the hands of this newcomer. She turned to him and was very wary, asking what his full name would be. The guy was a little embarrassed, but still answered that he was Hei Ming Oceanus. But call me Hei Ming for short. In any case, it's still a made-up name. At this point, the president continued her dialogue with him. Student Hei Ming? May I ask for some of your time? Sure. And she took him for a walk around the academy together, which surprised him a bit. 2 other female students immediately ran up to the girl and stood next to her. But the guy couldn't help thinking it was Julia Worcester. He watched her, the way she acted, and realized that there really is someone like her. He looked at her again, and finally, after living for so long, I can say for certain. But his assistant, who turned into a cat to be less conspicuous, interrupted him by saying that it seems that all of the students here, no matter if they are a commoner or a noble, really like the president. It also alarmed him and made him think. He immediately remembered Cindy, who was very mean and unpleasant, adding that both of them are young misses of a ducal family, but her personalities is the complete opposite of the one from the Sandal family. This phrase really alarmed the assistant, so she decided to ask again seriously what was really going on in the meeting room just now. Right now, he was thinking about that question, because when they were searching through the student records in the library, he doesn't remember seeing a Julia Worcester on the name list, and that is very strange. He became very tense and realized that, to be more accurate, he saw a barely legible sentence that seemed to spell out Julia Worcester, for there was also a very old picture of her. So he began to think that the student council president was supposed to be called Julia Avaster. The cat was also not left out and added that he also believed that grandfather's information was off. But suddenly the girl stopped them and said they had arrived at the place, then asked them to pass, holding out her hand. It was the same room as the last time. It looked like it was also the living room. The girl put a mug of tea on his table, which was exactly the same as at the beginning of the story, which really surprised Hai Ming. He thanked her and sat behind the couch with his hands on his knees, as a true student should, which is what he claims to be. The girl handed him the pendant and asked him to explain what it was and where he got it. She was very surprised and frightened because she didn't expect to see it at all, especially from a new student. Hai Ming was also really excited about this conversation, though he tried to look as serious as possible. Still, he wondered if he should tell her the truth, because the fact was that Grandfather Hai was the previous generation's Lord of the Sea, and communicating with nobles from the mainland is a breach of the boundary treaty. Still, he decided to be a little silent and not tell it. So he started blushing and made up a whole other story, adding that it was from a family elder. The girl listened very carefully to his story, and tears began to well up in her eyes. After that, she pulled him sharply against her and exhaled only the phrase, "So it's like that." The guy was a little surprised by this. He was very surprised that the girl wasn't planning to ask him any more questions. There was a bit of a strange and tense atmosphere. So the boy decided to cough and try to explain the situation of the pendant to the girl, adding that the elder from his family told him that if he showed this pendant to Miss Worcester, he would be able to receive her help. She didn't deny anything. That's right, because it is a token between the Worcester family and a very specific person, and whoever has this pendant can use it to ask her family for a reasonable request. The assistant was also very surprised. What does very specific person mean? Is it Grandfather High? Does that old man have connections with someone like her? But she couldn't get away from the feeling that this young miss might be hiding something very important from them. Now Haiming decided to fulfill her first request, saying that he would like the authorization to search through all the Academy's files. As the student council president, she should be able to get that for him, right? He realized that he was still blocked from using magic during his nightly trips to the information center, so he wouldn't want to make too much noise. The president was very alarmed by such a request, because then, what is he trying to do? But he said he was only looking for information and had absolutely no intention of doing anything wrong. At least if she believes in the owner of this pendant. She hesitated and looked him in the eye, then sighed and said she had no problem giving him permission. But she also had a condition. Immediately after that, the Academy appeared in front of us, in one of the offices of which rather strange and scary things were happening. Cindy was standing outside a large room with a huge monster sitting in the middle of the room, before whom she reported on the situation and everything that was going on in the Academy. It was Principal Leon Jellins, to whom Cindy began to tell what had just happened. As for the student who feels similar to the seal, it is a newcomer from the freshman class, Haiming Oceanus, and she knows exactly how to deal with him. Leon listened to her and wondered if that child has something to do with the seal. Cindy wondered, because I'm 90% sure it's true. Then Leon said that child is truly and started rocking in his chair, adding that let her do whatever she wants. She understood and said she would go first. Then she opened the door abruptly and said she would continue her search for the seal, but she hopes Principal Jellins will remember their deal. It was dealing about the whereabouts of the traitor in the Worcester family. Maybe Principal take note of it. Victor was waiting for her at the entrance and was very surprised that the girl was able to finish so quickly. But she was really very angry. She couldn't help thinking that the old man's attitude toward the newcomer seemed a bit weird. She immediately ordered Victor to go and call Leo and Siege, as there were several things they would need to attend to. Little Miss from the Sandal family, no sense carrying the previous generation's vengeance on her back. Meanwhile, Leon Jellins continued to rock in his chair, surprised that they came to him so quickly. And then, a second later, dark trails began to emerge from every corner of the room, similar to those that had been in the library before. As suddenly, they began to twist very sharply near the chair, after which the answer of arrival was not long in coming. Leon asked him if those people were prepared to defeat that child, to which the arriving monster smiled and said yes, they were. These seemed to be the same participants who were then playing a chess game and discussing all the events. Leon then ordered him to do things according to their instructions, to which he kindly agreed and smiled. And so, after a few seconds, having received the necessary instructions, the monster instantly disappeared, and the grandfather who was sitting in that chair began to think about what was happening, mentally addressing him with the phrase, "Child who came from the sea, I do hope that you won't threat blame me." Well, the story continues with the moment where the president of the Academy looks out the window and addresses Haiming Oceanus. She still couldn't figure out how he got her pendant, so she pressed it to her again and asked if it was really him. She remembered a situation where a guy was reaching out to her, clinging to a tree and yelling for her to hold on to him, saving her life. At that moment, a girl came into their office who wanted to talk about an upcoming competition that was planned and postponed at the Academy. She understood and said she would attend to it immediately. Meanwhile, some strange things were happening near the largest building at the Academy. as it looked like someone was using magic to make the trees wrap around the entire building. Haiming stepped closer and looked at the steps he had to climb, adding that this must be what that idiom means. He got a little upset and pulled his hand to his head, frustrated that there is no such thing as a free lunch. He remembered the words of the girl who informed him that the library is in need of more manpower, but the students have been a bit self-absorbed lately. So if he really wants it, she has no problem helping him apply for partial authorization of the archives. While he was still standing there, some guy also ran up to him and started yelling in his direction and drawing attention to himself, which really didn't please the guy because he didn't have time for this idle talk yet. It was the same watchman who had been on the same shift when the guy found the seal in the library and made a lot of noise. He was a little flustered and asked if the guy was really the student Miss Worcester had recommended. He confirmed that this was correct, after which the guard asked the boy to follow him. They were standing in the center of the room, and the guard decided to give him a tour, pointing out that the teacher responsible for organizing the library books still hasn't come back. So they need the help of a couple of students. He decided to light the candles and continued his story, adding that the books that need to be organized are on that table, and that he would take care of the rest, because he had to leave immediately. Haiming thanked him and sat down to review and analyze the books with a deep sigh, for he had absolutely never liked reading. Really, why would he do that if he was the strongest Lord of Sea in the world? It sounds even strange, but still he took the first book in his hands, because he knew himself that it would definitely not be so easy. His assistant also watched him and said that she thinks Miss President is just trying to mess with him. He didn't like that, so he hit her with the book, asking if she really had nothing better to do. After all, instead of making fun of him, why doesn't she just start helping him too? But she was very surprised and tense by the question, because doesn't he remember what her duties are? Ever since she became a spirit, she can't touch anything except for him. Checking another book, he just agreed with her and asked her to just stay there and try not to cause trouble for him. But the girl didn't like the fact that he thought she was lying to him, so she put her hand between the books to prove it, and also began to fly toward him, after which they both heard some very strange sound of falling, and saw the glasses that flew to the ground along with the books. It turns out that it was some blue-haired girl who also seemed to be on her way to the library, and accidentally slipped and fell to the ground. It was really unpleasant, because all her notes and books fell and scattered on the ground. She couldn't see anything, so she tried to fumble for her glasses amidst all the clutter. Suddenly, the guy came up to her and picked them up, handing them to the girl, saying that it seemed to be exactly what she was looking for, which really surprised her a lot. When she put them on, she said that they were the ones and added that there is already a bit of mist on them. After that, she was very happy and thanked the guy for his help and work. But he was a little shocked, because it seemed to him that the girl was really very scared and confused. So he decided to ask if she was okay, and she is not hurt anywhere. After wiping her eyepieces, the girl looked at the guy and was very much surprised and began to glow with joy, because she saw a really very handsome guy who began to communicate with her and also helped her. This immediately made her blush and embarrass herself, after which she began to react in a very strange way, because the first thing she did was to lean in front of him and tell him that she was fine and start thanking him, which he obviously could not have expected. The guy also didn't know how to respond properly, so he offered to help her collect all those books on the floor, which the girl refused and said there was no need. Just let this teacher do it herself. Then she used her powers and waved her magic wand, which lifted absolutely all the books and notes into the air. And a second later, all the books were sorted and stacked in the right order. She continued to be embarrassed, and even lifted her leg up to get the guy's attention, and added that she'd just go back to whatever you were doing, and no need to worry about this teacher. He and his girlfriend were shocked by this event, and just stood still for a while, trying to get away from what a strange teacher this was. Suddenly they saw a rock on the floor, which they immediately began to examine together, trying to guess why it was here. When they took it in their hands, they saw the inscription, Quimper Megamot, which surprised them very much. Hai Ming looked in her direction and asked, "Did that teacher drop it just now?" Then he continued to look at it, which aroused the girl's interest, for wouldn't he try to bring it back? He replied, "That teacher went up to the second floor. There's a magic circle protecting that area. If you don't have permission, you won't be able to go in." So he lifted the stone up again and began to examine it more closely, emphasizing the need to return it to her when she comes back down instead. But it was not an easy rock, because the inscriptions on it had already begun to glow, which surprised the guy very much. He began to feel that there was something off with this rock. It was already quite dark outside, so the guy began to stretch and was very glad that he had finally completed all his tasks. But the thought never left him that that inconsiderate teacher never came back. The assistant was also very tired and told him so, asking why didn't he just bring it back another day? After all, it is just a rock after all. He looked at her and agreed, for she may have gone out the other exit a long time ago. So they began to walk out, agreeing that they would just return it tomorrow. Meanwhile, someone started watching them and listening to what they were talking about. It was one of the mages who played chess and was on top of the building, if you can call it that, because it was more like just concrete slabs. But nevertheless, he watched them and laughed, as suddenly someone began to move in the bushes, which also made him very wary. So he instantly disappeared so as not to give himself away. The boys went on to discuss the situation that had happened to them, where the girl asked, "Now that I think about it, didn't that teacher call you by name, even though it was your first time meeting her?" "I think so. Maybe she knew it because the president told her." Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by two other Academy members, who were definitely not in a very friendly mood. So they started discussing them. "Isn't this the student our president has been paying special attention to?" What a coincidence. It was Leo Frayne and Siege Slyke, whom Cindy had previously asked to call for help. But Hai Ming was very surprised by them, so he decided to ask who they were and what they were doing here. But they didn't want to talk to him normally, so they started answering them aggressively. "Siege, don't it you think that tonight's scenery is perfect for the occasion?" "It is, young master." The guy kept standing there bewildered and shocked as they kept talking to him. "Are you stupid or something? Why are you suddenly narrating yourselves? Wait, I feel like I have seen this happen somewhere before." Everything around became red, and then the girl started screaming, adding that for nights where the moon is dark and the winds howl loudly. Then the whole place looked like hell and began to burn, and the guy straightened his arms and began to shout, saying that it is a perfect day to wreak havoc. And his eyes also began to glow with a red light that filled with terror. Immediately after that, Hai Ming began to run a little slip on the water. There was a really big rock in front of him that should have stopped him, but he jumped straight to the top of that mountain without much trouble, after which he jumped off and flew swiftly down, because he did not like this attitude to himself. But it is really necessary to save himself. He thought about that eye-like object he saw just now. Immediately, a red glow, very much like a bonfire, appeared not far from him, and whistled and caught his attention. And then, a second later, there was a huge explosion right in front of him that blew away absolutely everything in its path. It was a blow from the sky, very similar in trajectory to the meteorite that flew into the forest, and also hit our Lord of Sea Girl. He began to analyze the situation and said, if I saw correctly, that was a relic of Flame Spirit. A Flame Spirit of very high rank. But that is weird. How did he become a human's contracted spirit? Isn't it always serving at the side of the Black Flame Dragon? At this point, two of the Academy ran up to the guy and found him complimenting him on how he was moving really fast, which surprised him a lot. Siege became very angry. What? Not running away? Immediately afterwards, he started shouting, "Not like you could anyway," and activated a flame of fire, which flew toward the boy and the girl, and began to envelop everything in its path, destroying the ground. Hae-Ming was shocked, and a little scared, not even as much for himself as for his friend. He couldn't understand. Had the fire disappeared? Suddenly, a red stain formed in the ground near his feet, and it began to smell up. The girl immediately ordered him to step back, after which a second later, a huge ball of fire started shooting out of her, which was similar in power to a volcanic eruption. The guy smiled, realizing that it is an attack from underground, and he got lucky there. Siege was clearly not happy that he missed, so he asked his partner if he realized what had just happened. It was some scary spirit who looked like a very old grandmother and a man at the same time, and could not hide his aggressive emotions. He couldn't understand why the guy couldn't learn to control his earth-splitting fire properly. "Do you think you're being funny, doing some stupid surprise attack?" The guy's girlfriend was already very aggressive and asked his permission to teach that red-haired idiot a lesson. He was a little surprised by this offer, but still asked her to go and hide in a safe place, as it would be quite difficult to deal with him. He thought about the fact that he was originally planning to avoid trouble, so he ran away, but it seems that no matter what, he is forced into battle. But the girl started to stop him and talk him out of it, so she quickly ran up to him and started hugging him very tightly, and also tried to kiss him, which he obviously did not expect and did not want at that moment. So he started pushing her away from him, ordering her to stop making a fuss and go already, which she clearly did not agree with. But the guy needed her to leave because this place is too dangerous. She tried to explain to him that she didn't want to leave and let the guy get hurt again like the last time, so she would stay here to help him as well. These words surprised him very much, and he found it a little hard to believe, so he turned to her. And with a calm face, he asked, "When have you ever been useful?" She continued to hold on to him and clarified what he was allowing himself right now. People watched him in bewilderment and didn't understand why, right now, he was talking to the air. From the outside, it looked really funny and amusing. Master decided to act and said that this is too good. Keep yourself at a distance, to which his partner agreed. Immediately after that, things got really scary again. The magician started calling on the spirit of fire again, addressing him and shouting, "If you want to blame someone for your current predicament, blame yourself for offending someone who should never be offended." Suddenly, there was a little buzz and everything turned blue, after which the curse of flame charged and flew towards Hae-Ming, which really scared him, because he did not want to fight now. He also realized that right now he doesn't want to hurt a relic spirit at this point, so he started creating water around himself and made a protective field for himself against fire, adding that now he can only fight his way out. His water power began to resist the fire and protect him from damage, but he couldn't understand what was happening right now, so he was shocked. Was it really an explosion? The blast wave was very strong indeed, and it looked like Hae-Ming was not prepared for it at all. There were two guys standing in the trees, Cindy and Victor, watching the situation and the explosions in the woods. "Miss, it seems that it has started. But do we really have to do this? Now that I think about it, it could be that he only had the imprint of scent. It wouldn't be the first time the seal tried this trick on us." But the girl was absolutely sure what she felt from him was the seal and not just another imprint, that she could guarantee. Or at least, it is a scent that is much stronger than the one she has felt from the seal itself. She looked deep into the woods and added that since you aren't willing to help me in the academy, now that we are outside, Hae-Ming Oceanus, I hope you won't disappoint me. At this point, he coughed and tried to move away from what had just happened, but he had no way of knowing what was that explosion just now. After that, he got very tense and scared, because he remembered his friend Exie Air and asked if she was okay. She was just sitting on the ground with her knees bent and pointing her finger up, saying that everything was fine. This made him happy, and as long as she is okay, you can keep fighting. At that moment, the guy with the red hair came closer to him and started laughing and asking, "Did you go crazy from that hit? You are talking to the air again." He could barely contain his laughter, but he said it was just fine for him, since sending a crazy person to hell wouldn't burden his mind at all. So he stood up, spread his arms, and began to summon the spirit of fire again. Suddenly, blue flames appeared again, and a second later, a huge block of stone flew in, which began to interfere with the fire and engaged in a fight with it. It blocked the attack on Haiming and allowed him to remain unharmed. He closed his eyes from such a bright flash and couldn't believe it either. Was there really something blocking it? Neither could his opponent understand what was going on. And then, the stone block became several times larger and began to approach the ground, and then it broke and fell with all its force. At the top of the rock, feet appeared and began to slowly descend downward. Haiming began to get nervous and didn't understand who it was in front of him. It seemed to be the same mage who was playing a chess game. Is this the seal? Meanwhile, at Askar's mini theater, a guy was standing with a girl, and she started asking him about that flame spirit thingy. What is it? She has never seen it before. Kurkala? My knowledge is limited to the records written about them in Grandfather Hay's books. Kurkala is a flame spirit of very high rank. Born in the volcanic crater near the Relic of Flame, magma is its main source of food. Its personality is naturally warlike, by gathering and condensing the fire element through the vertical pupil at its middle. It attacks by shooting flaming beams of light. Once, as punishment for suffering defeat in a territorial battle against the Black Flame Dragon, their race was forced to serve the Black Flame Dragon. The 3 magic circles on its body are proof of its slave status. Then, where is the Relic of Flame located? What is the difference between their relic and our Relic of Sea? I think it is towards the southeast of the mainland. About the difference between our 2 relics. What type of spirit is the Black Flame Dragon? This. Who is more powerful? Our family's Leviathan or them? This question was not answered, after which the girl asked, "Also, why are you constantly chased down even though you are the Lord of the Sea? It feels like you have gotten weaker. Is it because you are a human?" Just reject you humanity, Haiming. But it made him angry, and he asked the girl to stop asking him questions. He would rather be dead than answer them, after which the snake bit his head again. Meanwhile, purple explosions began to form on the battlefield. Black magic became active, and the very chains that someone seemed to want to grab onto appeared again. Well, sitting at the table were the very principals of the academy, who still continued to play chess and discuss the situation. One of them added that Cindy Sandal's people are now in opposition to Haiming Oceanus. By killing Sandal's people and putting the blame on that lad, we should be able to divert her attention somewhat. But the second masked monster didn't seem to agree, because by muddying the waters, it will be easier for them to snatch the object. They are closer to the goal of releasing the seal on Master. But suddenly the clown interrupted him and turned to the most important of them, asking if he was really sure that no issues would arise this time. He simply stroked his snake that had been watching everyone in the library earlier and asked everyone to relax. This time they will be sending out one of the 7 people of the beginning, the puppeteer who toys with the world itself, the 6th puppet. At this moment, Haiming was as serious as possible, because in front of him stood the same mage who saved him from the spirit of fire and appeared completely unexpectedly. He did not know what would happen next and how to act. He turned and looked in his direction, which really surprised and scared the guy. He realized it was the scent of black magic. The master started shouting in his direction, asking where he had come from, and if he had come here to save that boy. But the mysterious magician just looked in the guy's direction once more, which made him very wary and frightened. The master was also surprised and angry. Wait, Isn't that black hooded figure an accomplice from the weird group Miss Cindy said the newcomer is in? At this point in time, according to the plan, he is supposed to retreat and wait for Miss Cindy to arrive. But he got very angry and realized that just me is enough. Then he immediately started waving his arms and summoning Kirkala, whom he directed toward the mage who had appeared. But he didn't care at all. He was as calm as possible and simply waved his hand, activating his water power without even looking in his direction. And immediately thereafter, a confrontation between the power of water and fire began, accompanied by very strong explosions. Suddenly, a few seconds later, there was a really strong explosion that made the mage laugh, and the guy feel very uncomfortable, because his Kirkala was very easily destroyed. The boy watched and did not understand what it was as it happened again. The fire exploded as soon as it touched the water, but the mysterious magician kept looking at him and decided to explain him a little, adding that water created through means of magic one did evaporate, even when faced with high heat, but if the flame that comes near is mixed with specks of dust, it will cause the water to evaporate in an instant, which will cause a series of explosions. So it is a type of compound magic which combines both the Department of Flame and the Department of Earth. But the guy was very surprised and scared because of what he actually saw through his magic, and he has to say that was quite clever. Haiming, observing the situation, was also shocked. He had no other thoughts but his own magic. He really wanted to figure out what it was, even though he was a person who always slept in class, but it is a pity. In the meantime, the conflict only continued to escalate, and already the mage took out his purple scythe, which he wanted to destroy the guy for excessive insolence, and swung it with all his might. A second later, the guy was already very shocked and frightened, so he tried to restrain her and stop the attack, but it was too late. The weapon hit him directly and hurt him very badly, all because he is not cautious enough. The guy with the red hair was shocked and visibly pale. His wounds just kept getting bigger and his pupils got smaller and smaller. He didn't understand what had just happened. How did they appear in front of him so suddenly? And why didn't Kirkala stop them? But the magician at this point continued to laugh and watch the situation unfold, while the guy was still in shock and fairly calm. After he realized what had just happened to him, he began screaming sharply in agony and screaming for help. Meanwhile, his assistant watched the situation unfold and watched as the unknown man in the black cloak continued to still stand on the rocks and do these things to his partner. It seems that young master's movements suddenly stopped. He was upset and scared because there is some black mist in the way, so he can see clearly. A huge red snake also appeared, which really looked as creepy as possible and inspired fear. Was it really Uncle Dragon and all that he said true? At this point, his assistant could no longer simply observe the situation, so he quickly ran to his partner, which surprised the wizard. But he didn't care at all. He wanted to know if he was all right. He picked him up in his arms and started yelling, asking if he was okay. But he showed absolutely no emotion, though his eyes were not closed, no matter how hard he tried. The magician explained to him that it is no use. He won't wake up no matter how much you tell at him. He smiled again and said that only I can wake up someone who is entranced by the black mist illusion magic. Sieg looked at his assistant and was very frightened. But the magician meanwhile continued, "You, on the other hand, have retained your consciousness ever since I started releasing the black mist. How odd." Sieg started yelling at him, even though he was frightened, ordering him to give the young master go or else. Doesn't blame him for being rude. But he didn't care at all, and it made him even angrier. So he ordered the guy to be quiet and directed another charge of black magic at him as well, which flew out and grabbed him by the throat. After that, he lifted him up several meters, and even though the guy screamed and tried to get out, the magician simply continued the dialogue with him. "I must thank you. If it weren't for you bringing yourself to death's door, there would have been a witness to my plan." The boy tried to get out as he was very uncomfortable with the realization, even though he was firmly trapped. He still pulled himself together and ordered the mage to let the young master go. He was very surprised by this, as he refused to listen to the guy completely, so he decided to clarify whether these would really be his last words. After that, everything around began to turn white. Well then, farewell. The mage also began to turn white, which was not the case with his magic. It looked like he already wanted to finish what he started and destroy the guy. But at that moment, a really very unusual situation happened, in which Hai Ming decided not to stay away, despite the fact that the unknown magician saved his life from two malevolent enemies who were trying to destroy the guy. So he immediately picked up his sword and threw himself into battle, ordering the black mage to let the guy go immediately.